A good portion of the work that teachers do is impacted by or related to evaluation and assessment. In fact, when children play at school, they often give homework and tests to their students as the first order of business. However, the reasons why we use evaluations and assessment is not often clear to those outside the world of education. There are 6 reasons that are most often provided as the reasons why we measure students. The first 2 are feedback, which is information used for improvement, and that information is provided for the student and for the teacher. Parents get information about their children from assessments. We also use the information from assessments for selection, and this one always makes people a little nervous. But if you consider that selection means getting students what they need, it's a bit more palatable. We certainly know that assessments provide information for accountability for the teacher, the school, the district, and the state. The last one is probably the most overlooked reason for assessment. When students, and I think teachers too, know where students are at in the learning, it can provide an incentive for them to increase their effort. We've all been there, right? A number on the scale or on our fitness app or on some sticker chart encourages us to push towards the next accomplishment. Feedback for students and teachers, information for parents, selection and accountability, and incentives for increased effort. Those are the 6 reasons we evaluate or assess students. I'd encourage you to commit these to memory because they are the foundation of the assessment choices that teachers make. You've probably noticed that I've been using both of the terms assessment and evaluation. Most teachers use them interchangeably. However, they do have distinctly different meanings if we're going to be technical about it. Assessment is used to determine needs or measure growth in learning. Evaluation determines competence or the level of learning achieved. Evaluation has the root of value in it, and that should be a trigger for you to remember that element of judgment. Depending on who is doing the evaluating or depending on the values of a community that places on any given quality being measured, evaluations can change. Think of your height and weight, for example. These things are measured in feet, inches, and pounds. If you're in Canada, they'd be measured in meters, centimeters, and kilograms. But your height and weight would be the same regardless of the measurement we're using. That's assessment. We stand you against the wall and put the ruler next to you, and we assess your height. There isn't a question about how tall or short you are. You are 5'6" or 6'2", without much discussion. However, if we were evaluating your height or weight, the person doing the evaluation would matter. If a child looked at their 5'2" babysitter, they might evaluate their height as being gigantic. However, that same 5'2" babysitter might not be seen as huge when trying out for the basketball team. Evaluation has a value or judgment element. Regardless of whether you are assessing or evaluating, the purpose of doing so is something that is significant to the choices teachers have to make. There are 3 adjectives that describe the purposes for measuring students. Often, near the beginning of the learning sequence, teachers use diagnostic assessments to make their initial plans for individual and group learning. The results of a diagnostic are feedback for the teacher, and it tells them where to start and what students already know or can do. Typically, diagnostics are quick tests and screeners. The results may or may not be shared with the students. Formative measures usually happen during the learning sequence and provide both the student and the teacher with feedback and incentives for improvement. Formative measures are for learning and can be informal, like a thumbs up or down, or formal, like a quiz. Summative measures are those that happen when all of the teaching and practice are done, and we want to find out the sum or total of the learning that students have achieved. These are essential terms that teachers must know and commit to memory. Based on the definitions, most often, diagnostics and formative measures are considered assessments, and summatives are considered evaluations. Again, it's important that beginning teachers know the difference and distinctions. However, most veteran teachers, they use these terms as synonyms. Remember, too, that these types of measures often coincide with their place in the learning sequence. A pre-assessment or diagnostic almost always happens before teaching is done and early in the unit or course. Formative measures happen throughout the learning process and in the middle of the lesson, unit, or course. Summatives are nearly always at the end of the learning journey and are culminating projects, unit tests, or course final exams. Validity and reliability are 2 terms that educators often confuse. These terms come up when we're talking about common assessments or ones that are used in multiple classrooms throughout a system, like final exams, universal screeners, or standardized tests. However, these terms also relate to classroom-based assessments and are good for teachers to fully understand. Validity considers whether or not an assessment measures what is intended to measure or not. Have you ever taken a test where the questions had nothing to do with what was taught in class? That's a test that wasn't valid. It measures material that the students weren't prepared for. To make sure that your assessments are valid, confirm with colleagues that your questions are actually measuring the learning targets you align with them. Reliability is a bit different. It looks at how consistently an assessment measures what is intended to measure. So, this comes up when classroom performance is being compared. Would a student assignment get scored the same way by one teacher as another? An example of these two would be this. If you wanted to measure writing skills, and we had students explain the events of a story they read, we might not have a valid measure, because in order to do the writing, the students must first be able to read the story, and one impacts the other. In the event that a teacher decides to let her students type their answers rather than write them by hand, we also could be measuring typing ability rather than writing skill. And this is another issue with the validity of that assessment. Reliability is different in that it looks at how likely it is that our writing test would get the same results from year to year or group to group. Would that writing test, asking students to retell a story that was read, get the same results if given under the same conditions? It's likely. However, would teachers score the test differently if they weren't trained together on what to look for or how to use the rubric? Yes. It's likely that results could be unreliable. This is why it's important for teachers to collaborate on expectations. Another set of assessment terms that are sometimes confused are criterion-referenced and norm-referenced. Criterion are a set of reference points, such as standards, benchmarks, or objectives. With a criterion-referenced measure, students are measured against the criterion. And when students are measured in comparison to other students at their grade level, age, or are ranked within their class, this is called norm reference, because the students are being measured against the norm. Criterion-referenced measures help students and teachers know what students can know or do, while norm-referenced help us know if that is like or unlike other students. Lastly, feedback is an important component of assessment. Without feedback, the communication from the teacher that tells the students what they did in relation to the criterion, the impact of the assessment is wasted. Students need to hear through conferencing, written comments, or checklists and rubrics how they did and what they need to do next. An interesting twist on the idea of feedback is called self-assessment. This happens when we ask students to reflect on their work and measure themselves against the reference points. Having students complete a checklist, a rating scale, or a reflective journal that explains where they used to be and where they are now on a given topic or skill is known to greatly impact growth.